All right, guys, we're going to be starting today's live stream just a few minutes early, and I'm doing that because the way I'd scheduled the live stream tonight was to give people the opportunity to log on and actually see this after the vice president debate was finished. So even though we're doing this on our regular Tuesdays, like we usually do our live streams here, I tried to make sure that I scheduled this so that it would allow people who, many of you are going to be political junkies who wanted to watch the vice presidential debate first, and you had a chance to see Vance versus Walz, at least for that 90-minute event out there in New York City, and then I figured we'd have a live stream shortly after that. So while more people are logging on, because I know I did start this a little early, I figured I would just go over a couple things. And just real quick here, I noticed, Thunderstriker, you did have a question here about, are we doing something new for this live stream, or is it still an Ask Me Anything? And the answer is it is an Ask Me Anything, although I anticipate people probably asking a variety of questions as it relates to the vice presidential debate from tonight. So just wanted to go over that really quickly. It's kind of like any of these that many of you who have logged into this before, feel free to ask me anything. I'll do my best to answer your questions. You do that, by the way, by filling out questions like this, and as Thunderstriker did there as well, right at We the Govern there, just it lets me see your question a little bit quicker, because what happens is there's oftentimes a lot of commentary back and forth between other people that are watching the live stream. That's great, but I can't spot your question sometimes, and I do my best to try to get to as many of your questions as I possibly can. Now, a quick little update, just want to give you a heads up for those who are regular viewers of my live stream. Next week, I am going to probably need to do this on a Monday rather than a Tuesday, because I'm scheduled to be out of Benton County speaking to the Farm Bureau out there on Tuesday the 8th. And so I'm, just because of that, and since that's where I'm going to be doing a live speaking event out there, I'm going to probably do my live stream Monday next week, and I would anticipate doing it around the 5:30 time frame, which is the normal time frame that I would schedule these. Also, because people oftentimes ask me these things, this Saturday, if you are in the Port Townsend area out in Jefferson County, feel free to come on by the Jefferson County Republican Oktoberfest event at around noon. Is what it looks like it's scheduled. I think you can come a little early. If you want to find out more about it, just go to the Jefferson County Republicans website. Make sure that's Jefferson County, Washington, and you're going to see that they have like an Oktoberfest flyer there. It has my face on it, holding a beer stein, and I'll be speaking there at that event, as well as I'm sure other local candidates who are running for office. And sometimes these live events, one-on-ones, great opportunity to chat, ask questions. I almost always take questions when I'm doing those events if the organizers will let me, and I enjoy talking to people and meeting new people all around the state, and especially if you're a regular viewer of my live streams or my videos, love to meet you in person, and that's an opportunity for us to do so. And then just a real quick heads up, if you happen to live out in Spokane, I know I was just out there a couple days ago with the Citizens Alliance for Property Rights. I spoke at their potluck event last Thursday. But I'll also be out in Spokane on Saturday the 12th, speaking at the GOP fundraiser that night. I actually don't have written down where that's located on that one. I know the following week I'm going to be speaking at the Ellensburg event, which is at Central Washington University. I think the Republicans of Kittitas County are putting that one on. But on the 12th in Spokane, I'm not sure where that location is, just to give you a little bit of heads up. So jumping ahead, let's get to these questions. There's a lot of them here already, and it looks like a number of you are coming off of your 90-minute marathon session watching the vice president's debate, and you're probably interested in you have some questions, and I'll kind of give you my feedback as I go along. I also watched it like many of you. I actually don't usually like watching debates most of the time, but this one was a little more interesting to me just because I had not seen I kind of wanted to see what Vice President, at least candidate Senator Vance, I wanted to see what he was kind of like in a debate setting. And just before we jump into this, because I do see a number of questions about the debate, I don't know how many of you have ever done debates before. I've done them a few times in let me think. Did I do something? I think I did. I know I helped organize a number when I was in college. I'm trying to remember if I was one of the debaters on any of those. I don't remember doing that specifically, but we certainly had students that were with me that did debates when I was at Columbia. And also later on when I did political, when I first got involved in politics about 14 years ago, I was involved in some debates. I actually like debates. I've helped organize debates since then for other candidates. I've moderated debates myself. I think there's a lot of value in putting these debates together. I actually think there's almost more value in doing these types of debates, especially for local offices where you really get a chance to see the two people, side by side. I debated, or I will call it a quote-unquote debate, but when I ran for office a couple times, I had at least when I ran for the assessor's office years ago. Thank God I didn't win, but I remember debating then too. They would put us up on a panel and they'd ask us questions. I mean, it was as close to a debate as I guess you're going to get. But the one thing that I can tell you is that you really have kind of two preps that you do for a debate. And it really just depends on whether you're somebody who is comfortable speaking extemporaneously and you don't have a problem doing that. Then I think debate prep for you is probably a lot easier, especially if you're familiar with the job or the whatever position you're running for. If you're pretty familiar with it, then I think a lot of things will just come naturally to you. And so I think you're going to appear, at least in a debate setting, to just be a lot more comfortable. The other way that people will sometimes prep for debates is they'll go and, game it out, especially in a big national debate like this. You'll have an opponent on the other side, and you'll have strategies and planned responses, and you kind of memorize some of the ways that you would respond to how they would bring up a predictable topic or a question that's likely to come up. And so when I look at Vance and Walz, and one of the things you could kind of see when they got started, I mean, J.D. Vance is obviously a lot more comfortable debating. This is a space he feels comfortable in. And that's hard to debate somebody like that. And Walz is still probably no slouch in a debate setting normally, but in comparison to Vance, he's just not going to be as smooth or probably as knowledgeable about some of the subjects. It's a little surprising because he has been governor, and I know he was in Congress before then, so you would think with that kind of background you'd be a little bit more aware of the different topics and issues. But there's a lot of things that are probably going through the head of somebody who's doing a debate, a prep for especially vice president. One of the weird things about it is that you actually have to at least be aware of where you have to kind of defend your running mate as part of this debate. It's not just what you believe, it's also defending what your running mate believes or has done or what their record is. And so that makes the vice presidential debate a little bit more awkward and a little bit different for debate prep. But I would much rather debate Walz if I was on a stage in front of an audience. I'd much rather debate him than J.D. Vance. It'd be a lot harder debating J.D. Vance, I think. So, but that being said, I don't know how much vice presidential debate has ever made much of a difference. I don't remember it ever making much difference in the past, and I don't think it'll make too much difference tonight. But it was quite a contrast because, frankly, both of these people were actually better at debating than either Trump or Kamala Harris was. And, Trump just has a speaking style that doesn't fit itself really well to a debate format. And Kamala Harris, I don't think, is a very smart person overall. And so I think she just comes across with a lot of word salad sort of responses. But in this case, Walz, has had a little bit more experience as governor and before that as a congressman. So he's going to have, at least some knowledge. And so as much as he was shaky out of the gate and probably didn't do as well as Vance did, this was a more classic kind of debate to watch than the last two presidential debates. And remember, I think I mentioned this before, one of the only reasons I think people are paying as close attention to debates this cycle is just because Biden blew up so badly, in his first debate. I mean, we've never actually seen a presidential campaign implode as a direct result of that debate. And of course, the only reason that the Biden administration and his political campaign came to an end because of that debate was really because you just couldn't conceal the truth from the public anymore, and the media really got exposed for who they were, trying to hide the fact that Biden really is just a dementia patient filling a spot in government, which of course really scares everybody because many of us wonder exactly who is running government today. We will never know. I'm going to run down through some of these questions, generally in the order that you've sent them to me, just because I see there's a lot of questions piling up. And Thunderstriker, you were kind of early on, and before the debate even got going, you had a number of questions here, so I will jump in and answer those first while other people send questions to me. Will Trump survive until another election? Well, I mean, I think the main thing is whether Trump will survive till we get to this election, because there has been 2 different assassination attempts on his life. And in our modern times, at least since JFK, I don't think we've had that many assassination attempts on a presidential candidate, unsuccessful attempts anyway, in such a short period of time leading up to an election. So this is a new territory for America, not good new territory, but it is new territory. And if I was Trump, I would be really more significantly the incompetence of the Secret Service is a little bit more of a concern, and hopefully they're going to do a better job moving forward and reducing the risky events and the near misses that have occurred. And of course, one that wasn't a near miss. He actually got hit by a bullet. It's amazing that he survived. And so we are running down this crazy time with all this stuff going on, and I'm assuming that he's going to survive to get to it. It is a concern, which of course leads to the next question that Thunderstriker asked, which is, I need your opinion. Do you think we're on the verge of another civil war? You know, I've answered this question occasionally. It does come up periodically in some of my live streams. People do ask this question not infrequently, and also it comes up in some of the comments on my YouTube channel. And that people believe that because of political divisions becoming so far apart that America is approaching some kind of civil war type setting. I don't know that we would necessarily be approaching a civil war, but I mean, you always run the risk of political violence when, in particular, one side feels suppressed, or the other side feels threatened, or they hype up violent rhetoric. The left has been primarily focused on violent rhetoric for a long, long time. So it's a little surprising to me that, but it's only really been recently that in the last few years that their violent rhetoric seems to be producing like this incentive to go out and commit more violence. We saw that with the 2020 riots around the country, but it's only grown worse with this kind of the talk that we see going on, and this the censorship is not a good thing either, because I tend to believe that if you want to stop or prevent political violence, you want to encourage more and wide open free speech. Political violence tends to come out of a suppression or a feel like there's no other option or no other ability to have your problem solved. And we've had as much as there's been political violence in American history, and there has, I dealt with that, I think, in one of my most recent videos. Whenever I bring up these topics in these videos, though, they get heavily shadow banned, even more than normal, by YouTube. So, again, it just kind of reinforces the problem that we have. Censorship, I think, encourages some of those problems. And then Thunderstriker, the last in the sequence of questions that you had here was, there were reports saying that CNN admits Waltz that he is scared to debate Vance. Do you believe that? I don't think Governor Vance, or I should say Governor Waltz, was probably scared to debate J.D. Vance, but he was probably concerned, and he probably recognized that J.D. Vance would have a better grasp generally on the issues and be a little bit quicker on his feet. It's one of the advantages, I think, especially if you do a lot of extemporaneous speaking. And here's what I mean by that. I've spent a lot of time going out and speaking in front of audiences, and I oftentimes public audiences in person, not just in a live stream like this format here. And I think I enjoy it. I like the give and take. People from the audience can ask questions. I oftentimes, if I have any influence over the program, I try to encourage people from the audience to ask questions and try to have a more interactive engagement with the audience if I can. there's no control over that, right? Anybody can ask any questions. I don't tend to go to Democrat organizations where they, control the questions and eliminate people's questions they don't like. That's what Democrats I've seen frequently do in kind of left-leaning operations. But when you're in these public settings, usually not, it's harder if it gets more than like 400 or 500 people, but if it's up to about 500 or maybe 600 people, you can kind of have a pretty open Q&A opportunity there. You absolutely get people who come up with crazy questions all the time, or questions that are completely out of left field, oftentimes not even relevant to anything. Sometimes they're personal attacks if it's somebody that doesn't like you. You just have to be kind of used to that or comfortable with that anyway. I used to do startup companies, and I would go out and make presentations about the product that I was, or the company that I was involved with, helping the board of directors get off the ground or something. And you're going to have hostile questions in those kind of settings, and so you really had to be pretty comfortable in taking those kind of questions, right? You just have to develop a level of comfort and knowledge on the subject that you're discussing, and that type of interaction, you just want to be comfortable with it. If you're not comfortable with that, then I think Q&A or debate, it just becomes harder. But if you have that comfort level, shifting into a debate with somebody else is actually pretty simple and straightforward. I doubt that he was fearful, but I'm sure he was concerned, and he obviously spent a lot of time trying to prep for it, and we'll see how it goes. Ruby Parker, you had a question here. Have the voter rolls been cleaned up, deceased removed, and how do we know if non-citizens are voting and diluting our votes as citizens of the United States? Well, okay, here's the deal. Do the voter rolls get cleaned up? They do a little bit. Even in the worst-run states, they tend to get cleaned up slightly. The Washington state, which is the state I've spent the most time focused on, we have put a shocking amount of energy and time into trying to help convince our auditors and Secretary of State to actually clean up the voter rolls here. And they do a semi-marginal job of that process. I'm less concerned about the dead voter rolls so much, because there's two ways you clean dead people off voter rolls. You use the death certificates in the individual counties, and you also use what's called the Social Security Administration master death lists. These are actually public lists that the auditor's offices and the Secretary of State's office pay for or get. Now, where dead people get left on the voter rolls in Washington state, at least the examples that I have found, it's usually cases where, and they get left on the voter rolls, it's usually situations like if they die in the same county in which they're registered to vote, that process is usually pretty clean, and I think most of the time they do get cleaned off the voter rolls in that case. If they've been moved out of the county, classic case would be like Benton and Franklin County, Eastern Washington, where more of the hospitals are in the Benton County side, and so if somebody's in hospice or they're kind of at the end of life, which is going to be where most people actually do die, and so they're going to be moved across they'll have a death certificate issued in a different county, a different coroner does it. It may not be so bad in Franklin, Benton County, but I've definitely seen this in King and Pierce and Snohomish County and some of the counties like that, where for whatever reason, the auditor's pretty tied into their local coroner's office, but they aren't tied in very well with the coroner's offices out of the county, and that's where sometimes people slip through the cracks and they stay on the voter rolls. But the dead voters voting in Washington state, it does happen. It happens frequently. Please don't tell me it doesn't. That's just foolish ignorance. That means you've actually literally never bothered to look at the voter challenges that have occurred and even been issued, fraud cases that Spokane, a number of different counties every year have, every 4 years or so. They're going to have some. They had some a while ago. They were relatively small numbers. I think they do a good, and usually what it turns out is it's like a family member that happens to be home and they get the dead person's ballot and they can fill it out close enough and they send it in. But for whatever reason, they found out, they being maybe the auditor's office, found out that person was dead by the time that ballot was sent in. What's going on? I've talked to a number of people who've had dead relatives where they still keep getting the ballots and the auditor's office refuses to remove them from the voter rolls and they have to fight over it for years. Many of you, some of you maybe even watching this video, have been the people who've contacted me about some of those situations. It happens. Non-citizens are absolutely getting ballots in Washington state by the hundreds, probably thousands. I don't know how many of those ballots are getting voted, but they get them in large amounts, and there's zero effort on in Washington State to clean up the voter rolls when it comes to non-citizens. Now, these doesn't mean they're illegals. It just they're here on a H-1B visa, right, student visa or something like this. And I know this because a lot of these people will come here and they've showed me their ballots. So from Canada, from China, from New Zealand, from Belgium, from Australia, I've seen it many times. They get registered to vote against their will. Even when they tell them don't register me to vote, they get registered to vote. Those people that are talking to me are clearly not voting, or at least they aren't the ones voting for their ballot. But I have talked to people that were here from other countries that also had people come to their door in Eastern Washington, for example, and buy their ballots for $30 each. So if there's reports of that going on, then those ballots are probably not being bought just for somebody to collect them. They're being bought because somebody's probably going to do something bad with them. So I think some of that's going on. What are the numbers? I don't know. I don't know how much it's diluted. It's probably happened for decades, but it's worse now. And I'm going to tell you something, and here's a critique I have for the Trump administration. Long before it got cool to suddenly care about elections after 2020, I remember being involved in a group and we were trying to actually get a list of non-U.S. citizens that were living here legally. So they had a legal reason to be here, but they couldn't vote. And we tried to get that list through the federal government. The federal government has that list because they go through immigration control. There's nothing super secret about it. It's not like if people know that they're not a U.S. citizen, they're going to get expelled. They're here legally. They have a green card. They have an H-1B visa or a student visa. But we wanted to help clean up the voter rolls in the state before the 2020 election. And the Trump administration did not cooperate with us and never gave us that information. I'm optimistic if he gets in there this time that maybe they'll help us at least use those databases to clean that portion of the voter rolls off beyond just those who are here completely illegally. So we got a lot of work to do. And so it's never going to be perfect, but it'd be nice to get it closer and in better shape than it would be before. Let's see. Let's get to a question here. Thunderstriker again. So I got a little batch of Thunderstriker questions that got all posted in here. And if you want to put your questions in here, please don't forget to do so. It says, what's wrong with the official debate commission? I know both candidates oppose it. Why does Kamala Harris oppose it too? Aren't the moderators supposed to be nonpartisan? Well, listen, the moderators are almost always biased. So far, everyone that we've seen that's gone up on ABC or any of the other stations that have had these debates definitely want to insert themselves into the process and try to basically influence the outcome of the debate by fact-checking, as we saw in the second debate in particular, where they focused only on fact-checking Trump and did nothing to fact-check Kamala Harris. And sure, she might have gotten the questions in advance. I don't know. That's a separate scandal for a different day. And so that's always a problem, right? We can't... we shouldn't be having the moderators try to influence the way the audience views either candidate. The point of the moderators is just it's mostly watching the clock and making sure you're kind of following the rules going back and forth. When I've done it before, that was my highest priority. It's just time. That's what I'm focused on. I don't care what they say. They can say whatever they want. The point is to let people hear what they have to say. That's it. That's what you're trying to do as a moderator. But if you're the moderator trying to influence, which they do at a national level, then, of course, you're going to generate unhappy politicians who aren't satisfied with the approach that you're taking. And obviously, if you're the one getting screwed over by them, you're going to like it even less. So let's jump into next question. Thunderstrike, you had a bunch of them in a row here. How much do you think the moderators will glaze Walz? And do people really believe that Walz has a 65% chance to win the debate? I don't know. I mean, that's not a question I can actually answer, and I don't know how to answer that question. So let's see. The questions will be directed at Walz, focused on JD's comments about Ohio, and we did see that in the debate. So this you must have asked this question before the debate. And he'll mostly have the opportunity to agree with the moderator, correct? I don't know. I mean, that wasn't exactly how it went down. But there was probably nothing surprising. I don't know about you. If you watched the debate, I didn't see anything that was that surprising. Ben Garrett, you have a question. Who do you think won this debate? I think J.D. Vance did. You know, I don't... Again, the big question here probably is... to what extent does the debate actually influence or change the way people think about voting? I did see a survey. There's like 14% of the people who were going to watch the debate were at least claiming that they were watching this debate to see which candidate they were going to support. But I don't think that's actually true for most people. I think that on average, people watch debates either because they want to go blue team, red team, good, bad. If you're a hardcore Democrat, Waltz walked on water and J.D. Vance was the Antichrist. If you're a hardcore Trump supporter, J.D. Vance was amazing and perfect, and Waltz was a nut job. I will make a quick point, though, here, something that was interesting, because the one thing that Waltz really was flubbing in his answers there had to do with the whole Tiananmen Square scandal, which came out. And this one stands out to me, and I'll tell you why, because personal, it's kind of weird, but I actually was in China before Tiananmen Square, about 4 months before Tiananmen Square happened. About 6 months before Tiananmen Square happened. And I was there on a running team. I was in high school. I was a good runner, and some coaches in Washington, and I want to say it was another state as well. I can't remember which state. I thought it was Wisconsin, but regardless, they were getting about 40 students, 40 runners together who were from high school, and they went. We went to Hong Kong, and then we took a ferry into China and had a running race in China, and then we came back to Hong Kong, and then we went to. That was shortly after the Olympics in Korea, and so we went to visit the Olympics, track and everything in Seoul, Korea, and then it seems like I think we flew home from there. So it was a great opportunity. I'd never traveled outside of the country other than Canada, which doesn't really count. So it was a big deal to me as a kid. It actually had a big impact on me just making that travel to Asia, and. Little did I know that I was going to be there a number of months before Tiananmen Square. In fact, after Tiananmen Square, these running events actually were canceled for a number of years. They might have picked them up again later, I don't know, but they certainly were canceled after that, and it was kind of a shocking event. It was weird to me that Waltz had some kind of fake story about pretending like he was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre, which just was like, I don't know why you would make something up like that. That's he's admitted, and it came out in the news that he was clearly not there, and because he was featured in some other news broadcast in Minnesota at the time. And getting, and it was obviously very awkward. He had kind of scripted some kind of a weird answer to it, but basically he had to kind of admit that he lied, and he was a quote knucklehead and said things that weren't true, or he was excited about it. I don't know. I went to China quite a bit after that, later on for work, when I would travel over there, and Taiwan and Japan and some other places when I was helping deal with manufacturing issues and sourcing products and stuff. But you're going to know if you're in China or in Hong Kong for the protests around the Tiananmen Square timeframe. So it's kind of weird that you would lie about that. I don't know why you would. One of, I think, Waltz's probably biggest weakness is just his history of this weird, favorable sort of approach to the communists in China. Don't think that helps him in this election cycle, and it does make some people a little concerned about him running for office. But it is kind of weird, and it did come out, and we'll just have to see how it goes. Waltz hasn't even come close to winning one round. Am I right? It really depends on the perspective of the person watching the debate, honestly. You can sit in a room with a bunch of left-leaning people watching the exact same debate and come away with a different feeling, most likely, because they'll latch on to certain things that they're focused on. It's kind of like a religious debate. It's impossible to necessarily win in some ways. However, maybe for people who are a little more open-minded or looking at this, I would say, I get the sense, though, that Waltz did not do well overall, but he didn't do as bad as people were predicting, I think. I don't know if the reason why Trump chose Vance was because he was a great debater, but to be fair, Vance is a better debater and a better communicator in this type of format than Trump. I really believe he is. Trump just has a different type of style that is a different speaking style that doesn't lend itself great to a debate format generally, but it does seem to connect with regular people, and it doesn't matter if you believe me or not, just go to one of his events and I think you'll see that. Thunderstriker did bad in the beginning. Let's see. I don't know about these measurements that you're referencing here about Polymarket saying that somebody did percentage or did something else like that. But we will see, and I'm sure there'll be 1,000 people writing about it later. Governor Walz called himself a knucklehead. Yes, he did. And I thought that was kind of fun. Which, of course, leads to the inevitable knucklehead. And I don't know. These memes kind of write themselves when people do this stuff. That was a fun debate, Nathan Danner. And here's the thing to remember about debates. Okay, I like debates, actually. I generally would enjoy debating people on the left, especially people on the left. But my experience has been when you offer to debate them. I remember a number of years ago when I was first getting back involved in the political process, like 2011, something like that. And I was fighting the Thurston County pocket gopher schemes that they were organizing. And it became obvious that they were just they had faked everything. It was such a fraud. And the policies were ridiculous, and we caught the Fish and Wildlife Department, like they didn't even do their math right. So they were setting aside these circles around pocket gopher mounds, and they did the math wrong, geometry, elementary geometry, and so they screwed that up. They were caught. They had to change things. It was just ridiculous. You were coming up with all kinds of weird, once you actually peel back the layers, you realize just how incompetent and dishonest all these experts supposedly were. So I offered to debate the commissioners, any of them, all of them, any experts they wanted to dig out of whatever recesses in the bureaucracy they could find them, and debate this whole ridiculous policy in Thurston County. And I offered to debate them time after time after time, went up in public comment, brought it up, different formats. And of course, they always refused. I had the same experience in college, actually. I remember we got one debate in, and then the socialists refused to debate us ever. So, and they just ran away the entire time. Now, part of it's because the left generally believes there is no viable viewpoint outside of their own, and so they're just unwilling to accept. It's a very closed religious sort of system, religious in the sense that it's an orthodoxy, right? So you're just not allowed to diverge from the orthodoxy. But if you are, again, I think a good extemporaneous speaker, which I think J.D. Vance appears to be, then and sort of what you're talking about, then you're going to generally be a pretty good debater. Doesn't make you perfect, doesn't mean you're always going to be right, but it makes you a little bit better debater, and it makes it more interesting to watch the debate. What I have found consistently, though, is that the left just doesn't like to debate on anything, and I don't blame them. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to defend some of their ideas, too, but it's just interesting to see where it goes. Can the vice president also serve as press secretary? Nathan, that's a great question. Actually, there's probably no prohibition for that. I'm sure the vice president could serve in that capacity. And to be honest with you, I don't know that Vance would want to do it, but I think filling in that role typically for some period of time would be super smart. And I think that if Trump did that with Vance, that would be an interesting precedent, because generally what happens is the vice presidents are typically just somebody that's kind of an afterthought, right? They're brought in for political reasons, usually during the campaign. Sounds good at the time. You forget about it later. Pence was brought in because Trump wanted some gray hair, some guy with more experience that people would be comfortable with, since he was kind of the bull in the china shop kind of idea. Biden brought in Kamala, even though she'd called him a blinding racist in the presidential debates on the Democrat side of things. And even though she got zero support because Biden invented some DEI reason that he said he needed to have a black woman there, and he kind of limited his options. So Kamala's the one he chose. And you can go all the way back. I mean, most of the time, vice presidents are very forgettable sort of positions. And that being said, it was pointed out recently in an article that I read, and about 30% of the time, vice presidents have the potential to become president later on, probably more common recently. But whether that's Nixon, who came out of being the vice president under Eisenhower, then he, of course, was elected in 1972, or 1968 and 1972. Then you had Lyndon Johnson, of course, who became president on the death of JFK when he was assassinated in 1963. Then you also had H.W. Bush, who became president after Reagan served his 2 terms. And again, these are just, and then you had Biden recently, who became president after he'd been vice president under Obama. So the importance and significance of the vice president probably has become more important in recent years than it was in years past. So it's kind of a big deal. Paying attention to this, getting an early view of who these guys are early is good. I think that it's kind of important for average voters to get a chance to see people like J.D. Vance be able to express and explain themselves, and knowing that it's not just a talking head, but somebody who actually serves in public office right now. It's sometimes you get these people elected to public office, and they're actually incompetent communicators, surprisingly incompetent, and that is not him. Let's see. Ben Garrett, good news. I got both my grandmas and my mom and dad on board with voting for Reichert. They are all Democrats and have been so for a long time. So there's hope of crossover in Washington. Well, Ben, thank you for telling me that, and just keep up the good work. Spread the word far and wide. And, you know, if all of us try to make ourselves responsible for helping bring another 50 or 100 votes in the correct direction, or at least in the direction of sanity, real math, and people who actually believe they can identify what a woman is, I think we'll have a better result when it comes to Election Day. Let's see. Do you think Vance missed an opportunity to, this is Delvin Hart, contrast this stance on potential World War III risk with missile strikes into Russia? Yeah, he probably did, but I'm going to tell you, it's what's interesting to me. You know, and you're looking at these 2 guys on stage, and so everybody's an armchair debater, right? Just like they're an armchair quarterback during football season. So everybody looks at this, and everything's crystal clear to you looking at this, saying, come on, I'm a political junkie. I know this. This is something that you should bring up this issue and contrast it. And it's very, I mean, you got to think on your feet. Generally, J.D. Vance did a really good job doing that. Thinking on his feet, you could see him, his mind was working right when he was looking over at Walsh. You could kind of see him coming up with his answers or dealing with the moderators. And the moderators early on, by the way, were obviously biased, and they claimed they weren't going to fact check, but then they came out with these weird factual statements early on. They didn't do that later on in the debate, but they did in the beginning. And you saw J.D. Vance confront him on that, and that was good. I think he needed to do that. But generally, it's easy to go back and say, oh, you missed this opportunity. You're always going to have those feelings. Yeah, I guarantee you, J.D. Vance is sitting back there thinking, oh, I missed this opportunity. And Walsh probably is too. But I don't think Walsh has that, snappy sort of just demeanor where you're going to be responsive. You know who'd be good? Like, if you see some of these talk show hosts, some people just be really good debaters, right? If you've ever seen, the guy that took over after Rush Limbaugh, and I don't know why I'm blanking on his name right now, but anyway, like, he strikes me as a guy that'd be really good debating, like just really responsive and super, very effective debater. But we'll see. So, let's see. And Ben, you came up with the question, has anyone convinced a few of their family and friends to vote for Reichert in November? If not, I heard you encourage you to get the word out. Yeah, I mean, just if you want sanity and you don't want the most corrupt guy we can possibly find in Washington State to be governor, I would agree with that approach. Let's see. Thunderstriker, you're asking actual questions. This is something to point out to people. It's easier for me to get to the questions, and even though it seems like Thunderstriker's getting all the questions here, it's because he's actually asking questions. If you don't ask questions, hard for me to answer anybody's question. So if Trump wins, Vance could step in. If Trump does it right, he could retire after 2 years, letting J.D. Vance finish his term. If J.D. gets reelected, he'd serve 10 to 10 years with Vivek as VP. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people come up with it's just like coming up with a fantasy football team. People come up with fantasy political teams all the time, none of which ever really comes together. But Trump has a potential, let's say he does get elected, having a young, aggressive, sharp, and capable VP does set that person being the VP up for a better opportunity moving forward. It really depends on how J.D. Vance does in that position as vice president, assuming he gets there. Does anyone else get the feeling that Vance is trying to recruit Waltz to join the Trump campaign? Also, do you think this will change favorability rating? Well, okay, I'm going to tell you what I think I saw there. And one of the things is that when you saw when you see a debate and there's a lot of hostility and they're kind of arguing back and forth, most people are uncomfortable with that situation. That it's really true. I mean, the most extreme kind of politicos where you're blue team, red team type guy, you might like that because you're getting digs in on the other side, but that isn't actually what most people, especially people who are a little bit more unaware of following the day-to-day body blows of politics, they aren't going to like seeing people hammer on each other that way. Little digs are fine, but things that seem mean, things that seem nasty back and forth, that tend to turn a lot of people off. I mean, listen, this is the whole mean tweets problem that Trump had. There's a certain segment of the population that won't vote for Trump because of mean tweets and uncouth statements or name calling that he's had in the past. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I would do that myself either. That's not the way I am, but I think that that's a big thing that turns people off about Trump for some segment of the population. But the truth is, on a bigger scale, people don't like watching people fight. Jerry Springer might have been awesome, big ratings for some people, but most people don't really like that. So they're uncomfortable watching that, so they don't like doing that. So usually the rule of thumb in most of these debates is to be polite and respectful to the opponent that you're debating on the other side. And so if you maintain a decorum at that level, it doesn't mean you're not digging them, doesn't mean you're not contrasting, doesn't mean you aren't disagreeing with them, but you don't have to be disagreeable to do it. And that's really what you saw there more than anything else. That's just Waltz being, and really Waltz did the same thing back too, right? That's how they were doing. Let's see, Mo Bus, elder millennials, look it up. Vance, Tulsi, and Vivek, all elder millennials. We're taking over. Maybe you are. Eventually you have to. That is the way generations work. Hopefully people are capable of handing it off to the next generation. Nathan Danner, a general estimate of what percentage of the time Waltz is a knucklehead? It's a great question. I mean, judging from his really bad record, and when I talk to people out in Minnesota, he's not a popular guy. He did not do well during COVID. He did terrible dealing with the riots in that state, so I wouldn't consider him a capable guy. But or somebody that you'd want. That being said, he comes across as a lot more intelligent than our governor in Washington State, Governor Inslee, who's really not a good, capable guy at all. I mean, if you want to see how bad Inslee really is, just go back and look at some of the debates that he had. Inslee lost every debate he ever had. Rob McKenna, Culp. And, he just, every debate that Inslee ever had, he lost, but it just didn't matter. Nobody paid attention to the governor's debate. And because he looked so stupid and incompetent in those debates, the media just simply ignored it and pretended like it never happened. Let's see. What do you think about J.D. Vance's if Trump lost the 2020 election or not? Oh, I kind of remember when they got into this, Zor-El, this is not a bad question because the whole thing about elections came up. And this question came, because of course the main thing they're going to say is, oh, you're election denier. I love the fact, here's one thing that Vance did well, which is something I brought up before when this issue's come up, and I've talked to journalists about it, and they always like to ignore it. The Democrats in this country have been basically denying elections since the beginning of time. I mean, it happens all the time on the Democrat side. I remember the 2000 election. Remember how Democrats spent at least 4 years after the 2000 election denying Bush's election. And then again in 2004, they spent really 8 years, the entire time Bush was in office, for all of his problems and issues. The Democrats obsessed about election denying. They were the election denying party. So the same thing happened in 2016. Every elected official, just about, I mean, they did everything that they accused Trump of doing later in 2020. What's weird about, not weird, but it's just typical, it's a double standard, right? The Republicans are never going to be held to the same low standards that they set for the Democrats. They always set high standards for Republicans, low standards for Democrats, and the rules are very different. That's how the media treats it, and they always have. But this election thing has been the one that's really interesting to me. And I'm glad that J.D. Vance pointed out that whole thing with Hillary Clinton being the biggest election denier, ever, and she still is to this day. So, anyway, let's see. Okay, good point here. And actually, this isn't a question, but you raise an interesting issue. ITA, I'm a nurse voting for Trump. There's lots of us, but we keep quiet at work so we don't lose our jobs. This is the problem that I think we've seen with polling. Now, obviously, Trump has always polled with a higher degree of negative than I think where he is in reality. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I woke up the morning after Election Day in 2016 laughing so hard, because I saw Trump win, and when I went to bed thinking he wasn't going to win. I remember thinking he didn't have a chance of winning in 2016. I voted for him, right? But I just didn't think he had a chance of winning. And then suddenly to wake up and see him winning, I was laughing so hard. And I realized part of that was because people had been falsifying their surveys, or people they were lying to the survey, the people who were taking the surveys, the shy Trump voter, I mean, all these different scenarios. And because the left has been so nasty and vicious at trying to install conformity and suppression of free speech and censorship and all this other stuff that they've done, they've driven a lot of people underground. And so nobody's telling the truth. I have friends right now who purposely voted Democrat in the Washington state primary because you had to put the party affiliation on the back. Now, they did it just to mess up and they wanted to be shown in the public record as a Democrat. But there's no way they're voting Democrat. They're voting hardcore Republican, super conservative people. I know several people that do that. So it throws off all this information. They even show me all the Kamala Harris texts that they get all the time. They hate it because they don't want to respond to all these texts that get avalanched after they indicated they were Democrat on the ballot. But so how much does how accurate are these surveys? I think it's really hard. I'd hate to be a guy trying to make a living on surveys, but then again, nobody really holds them accountable for their failures later on, so I guess it's a great job to have. Let's see. Waltz won just on the virtue that he had to defend Kamala, and he almost did a convincing job. Vance came in with an advantage, and he blew it, in my opinion, right? No, I don't think so. I think Vance did fine. Listen, it's really hard. And we're going to all micro-analyze and all these other talking heads in order to distinguish themselves from each other probably is they'll be trying to come in and say, oh, well, Vance should have done this or Waltz should have done that. Listen, Waltz was obviously nervous in the very beginning. Vance is obviously more comfortable in this setting. I talked about why. I do think that extemporaneous speaking and probably having some grasp or knowledge about the topic that you're speaking and comfort with being able to deal with it and understand it. In front of a huge audience, right? I think it's very important. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that makes it easier for you to be a debater if you're willing to do that. It really kind of depends on your comfort level in that setting. And I don't think, one of the things that people used to the surveys show, right? One of the scariest things for people is to be humiliated in public or to get up in front of an audience and speak, right? And it was one of the reasons why I encouraged my kids, actually, because I didn't do this when I was younger, but to take a speech class when they go to Running Start Community College and get used to speaking in front of the audiences. Because you got to eliminate that fear, and you got to develop at least a basic skill so that you can do that without too much without more than normal butterflies, right, or concerns. For me, one of the things, I had a huge disaster of a public speaking event one time when I was doing startup companies. And it actually, in hindsight, it destroyed, because it was so disastrous for me, it kind of blowtorched out my fear of humiliating myself in public, because I clearly did. And it had to do with, I had to fill in for a founder of the company it was a medical device company. I was really familiar with it operationally, and I was very used to doing presentations to investors or vendors or other technical people, so I understood how it worked because I was the operations director and I'd helped develop this whole thing from the beginning. So I was very familiar with how it worked. Very comfortable presenting it, demonstrating it, explaining it to audiences, even big audiences, if that was the format in which I was doing it. But the owner of the company, the founder of the company, I should say, had this plan to go down to California, and he was going to present to all these venture capitalists. And because I wasn't going, I really wasn't paying attention, and he had the employees of the company make a different presentation for him. He was going to play on a DVD, I guess, back then. So this is, imagine 2001, like early 2001 timeframe. And so anyway, at the last minute, his wife got sick. He couldn't go. And so he calls me. I'm still at the office, 9 o'clock at night. And he says, Glenn, you got to catch the 6 a.m. flight and go down and do this presentation for me, which of course I said I would do. Problem was, he sent an employee to meet me at the airport in SeaTac, and I remember they gave me the disc. I stuck it in my laptop to look at it so I could be familiar with the presentation. I mean, I knew the product, I knew the company, I had been there from the beginning, and it didn't work on my computer. A smart person, which I was not, would have said, forget it, I'm not doing this presentation, right? I don't have a presentation to do. Now I'm gonna have to go up there and do this with nothing up on the screen behind me, and what he gave me, it just isn't working. Like, it's not working on my laptop. But like an idiot, I thought, well, maybe I can get it to work while I'm up there. And I just didn't realize the significance of what I was going into. It was one of these big, huge rooms, hundreds and hundreds of people, all venture capitalists, and sitting, and they had like 2 different presentation podiums up there, and they have a spotlight on one, and then there'd be a screen behind you that you're controlling, and you get 5 minutes, and then boom, spotlight comes off and it shifts the other person. So you're literally in the spotlight on the hot seat. And I went up there, and it was such a disaster. I actually have PTSD from it. I can't remember. I just blanked out. My mind just went, I don't know how badly I did, but it was terrible because there was no presentation. The whole thing fell apart. And, it was a terrible experience for me. And I remember after that experience, I was so happy I did it down in California and not at home in Washington State, where I was likely to run into these people again, because it was just terrible. I did such a bad job. But the funny thing is, after that, speaking in public became much easier for me. Now, when I first started running for office in 2011, I remember Kim Wyman, back when she was a county auditor, she saw me at one of my first presentations, and I did a terrible job. And then she saw me towards the end of that campaign, and obviously I was a lot better. And she was saying, wow, I can't believe how much you improved. Well, a lot of it's just practice. You get up there and do it, and a lot of it's just understanding this type of public interaction that you would have running for office compared to sales, presenting your product to something. And so, I just got more comfortable with it and more used to that, to the political world. And I do think that that's the kind of thing that helps people. I don't get nervous going in front of audiences, even hostile audiences anymore, because you just do it so much that, I know what I'm talking about. I like to know what I'm talking about anyway. I think I do. And I don't mind interacting with people who disagree with me. I prefer it sometimes. So, what do I have to be nervous about? Tell the truth, try to be honest up there, right? And, it is what it is. Let's see. Chris, sorry this happened to you. Getting banned on YouTube or any other platform is kind of annoying. Let's see. How many paths, Thunderstriker again, how many paths to victory does Trump have compared to Harris? I heard he was trying to box her in. Is that still feasible? I don't know. I'm not even spending a lot of time really looking at the assessments or analysis of the swing states, this and that. I mean, you get 1,000 articles written about every little angle and nuance that can be out there. I am focused on trying to expose some of the stuff that's going on locally in our state, which I think there's a lot less attention to, and we need to do a better job amplifying those messages and send them out there. But at the end of the day, winning an election at a national level, obviously, for president, you focus on your swing states, especially making sure that if you have a state that's even close, that you've done a good job shoring up your campaign. A lot of it's really nuts and bolts stuff. It's not super glamorous or exciting. It's just the basic stuff that you need to do. When you know that when you know the media is against you, you also have a slightly different campaign, and hopefully a fairly realistic one that you're running forward. So anyway, Zor L, what did you think about Vance's non-answer if Trump lost the 2020 election? I think he did what he probably needed to do for that answer. Again, that'll be one of those things. If you're J.D. Vance and you actually go back and look at yourself doing this and you care about it, you're gonna, critique yourself I'm not that like I don't look at things that way. I don't ever go back and look at my own videos, or I rarely do anyway, to go back and say, oh, I should have done this better or something, because you're always going to be your own worst critic. And generally, I just feel like, well, I think that came across well, or I think I was effective at explaining something, or I think I was terrible at it. But I can usually tell live when I'm screwing up that way. But something that this next commenter, it's not a question, but I'm going to point it up. Vance did great. He did come across very likable. And so from a voter impression standpoint, honestly, sometimes that matters more than winning the debate if you can be that way. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. I will limit, Jack Balder, I will limit my comment to only one, so Thunderstruck can ask his 37 questions. Your thoughts? Well, you got to come up with that question, Jack, so please do. Let's see. Gray Man. Listen, this is it's a comment, not a question, but Republican and Democrat leadership both work together for their own benefit. And I believe that is true oftentimes. It's been a critique, even back when I was in college and first got involved in the political process. And I was frustrated with weak Republicans in office and certain policy focuses. I would hope that if you're going to be involved in the political process, you have a belief system, you know what you believe and why you believe it, and what policies you're trying to implement to get to that level of whatever your goals are. Hopefully it's around liberty and freedom. That's what it would be around if you are on my team, I think, if you care about liberty and freedom. And then you're going to prioritize and operate politically with that objective kind of always there. Everything I'm doing to shrink the size of government, expose the truth about corruption, keep government out of our lives as much as we possibly can, and have government operate the least and most efficiently that it needs to for the critical areas in which government actually has a role, and keep them the heck away from the other parts of our life where we don't need them and government only makes things worse. That all, I think, focuses on liberty and freedom, but I always try to come back to that. Is this something that moves freedom and liberty forward? But I don't know, and a leftist is going to focus on it a different way. And I think sometimes as people get into public office, especially at the higher levels, especially in Congress when you're one of 435 people, or even in the Senate where you're one of 100, even the state legislature, when you're just a small group of people in Olympia, Washington State, right? If you're in Olympia, you're just there, and oftentimes you're spending, even though it's a part-time legislature, you still spend months, intense months, interacting with people on the other side. Now, again, you can disagree, but not be disagreeable. But for a lot of people, that crosses the line, and pretty soon they just become the uniparty. That does happen. It happens more than it should, especially for those of us who actually do want to make change or fix what's broken in Washington. But it isn't that way for everybody, and not everyone's the same. So that's just how it goes. Mark Robinson do you think Mark Robinson has a chance to bounce back in his campaign? Can Trump get Virginia's numbers close to 2016 levels? I actually am surprised at Trump's ability to do well in Virginia the way that he has been. I kind of thought that all of this stuff coming into Virginia, just all the grant grifters, the government leeches, the bureaucracy that exists mostly to suck the lifeblood out of the taxpayer. I mean, from D.C., it's kind of spread like a big blob around there. And so that's going to influence how people vote. They're going to vote Democrat because that's how you get most of the cash. So I'm surprised that that Trump's done as well in Virginia as he has, and as the polls seem to show. Now, Glenn Youngkin being elected governor there obviously makes an impact, and perhaps the tide is turning in some ways. We'll have to see. I don't know. It's impossible for me to necessarily predict it. Related to this, though, are we likely to see an October surprise? And let me talk about the October surprises, because a lot of people are reading the tea leaves for their own reasons and in their own ways, but some people do come up with roughly the same analysis or assessment as to what's going on. There's always going to be October surprises. Some of them aren't much of a surprise, and some of them aren't that effective. But there's always going to be some. Today's October 1st. Good Lord, I think the next 4 weeks are going to be insane. Now, the big fearful things on the bigger scale is not because somebody has a scandal somewhere, or some politician looks like an idiot, or somebody has naked pictures of J.D. Vance dancing on the table in Iraq, or Walt has his "thank you for being a good communist" plaque from China. I don't know. I mean, you're going to have things like that come out, but those aren't the kind of things that I'm worried about. When I say worried, I mean the things that I would put on a different plane of category of concern. I'm mostly concerned that the left feels like they're going to lose a fair election, and that there's panic in senior levels of bureaucracy, which cause them to take extreme and weird actions that are harmful to our country, but for whatever reason they think it's going to help them maintain the power base or the political gravy train that they're on. Things that concern me are more about involving the country in war, unnecessary war. This is not just because my daughter's in the Air Force right now at the academy. It's because war is something that we should avoid unless we absolutely need it, right? Unless you just are forced and you have to go to war, you should not be trying to intervene in every little excuse of a fight every single time you possibly find it. And particularly when those wars are avoidable and unnecessary, it just doesn't make any sense. And I consider that a terrible thing because it would be somebody manipulating a terrible world event so that you help yourself politically. The other thing I'd be concerned about is more dramatic problems in America caused by either subversive kind of things like shutting down the power grid. We had the big Verizon lockout. I don't know if it happened where you live, but a lot of people I know that didn't have Verizon cell phones. Well, imagine what happens when you don't have power or cell service. It's usually not a good thing. Most people are not prepared to function for a long period of time without any way to communicate with anybody else or any power at home. So the encouragement I would have when I'd encourage you when you're facing a potential period of instability and political unrest, regardless of how it starts, come up with a plan and be prepared at home to, I'm looking at these hurricane victims right now in North Carolina and Georgia and Florida, and people are saying they're running out of food after just a couple days. Those are people who weren't prepared. That's a terrible situation to be in, and it creates a desperate scenario. As bad as things can be, if you're at least a little bit prepared, have a little bit of food, so at least you can last a month or more on your own. You have a source of water that's reliable. You have friends and neighbors and family nearby that you can work with and communally solve some of your problems. Don't rely on the government to come be out there to solve your problems. Most of the time they won't. I don't care what administration's in charge. And that's a terrible mistake to put your faith and reliance in somebody else like that coming in from the outside. Besides that, you don't want them to come save you. You want them to save somebody else who's in a much more desperate situation. Your preference is to be able to save yourself and to solve your own problems and to be prepared for yourself because you're going to care more about your family than anybody else will. I would encourage people to just be a little bit more prepared going into this cycle. I fear that no matter who wins the election in November, there's going to be a big angry group of people who lost and see that loss as a particularly justifiable excuse for them to do bad things. And so it's good if you have some level of preparation going into it. I hope that doesn't happen, but it makes me concerned, and I'm far more concerned about something like that. Jason Fisher, hey, Glenn, I hope you're doing awesome. Tim Walsh is friends with with school shooters. What's your thoughts on the cleanup of the migrant camp by Seattle? Are they going to be dumped elsewhere? Well, anyway, that was I am positive that if I was Waltz was so nervous in the beginning of this debate that I actually kind of believe that statement was a clear misstatement on his part. He didn't mean to say that he was friends with school shooters, but of course he did, and national television. And it's weird because he's a Democrat. They won't, keep playing that same section over and over again. But at least the media won't. ABC will probably censor that out of their final debate video, but that was kind of a crazy thing. So I thought that I caught that too. I thought that was a weird thing to say, but I felt like it was probably a mistake on his part. But maybe not as overt a lie as when he said he was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre. But anyway, when you say you're asking me my thoughts on clean up the migrant camp by Seattle, and of course they're going to be dumped somewhere else until you change your policies to change people's willingness to make those lifestyle choices, usually involving drugs and other things. You're just simply shifting them around the community. If you change your policies so that they don't get free drugs or cheap drugs or easy access to drugs in your community, then they move somewhere else. But moving the camp out, I do think that even in Seattle, they've decided that they have to at least pretend to be cleaning things up until the election. Maybe after that, they let everything go back to hell in a handbasket. But until then, that's kind of their approach. Let's see. Gavin. Oh, I saw this. Yeah. TZ Burton, great question here. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, just passed a law banning voter ID in retaliation to Huntington Beach referendum on voter ID. Can somebody sue or can this law be overturned? Even Venezuela requires ID. That's true, but Venezuela is probably a more honest dictator than Gavin Newsom, and he's just so corrupt. I mean, it's these guys are so bad. Anyway, yeah. Obviously, Gavin Newsom is totally in favor of vote fraud in every measurable way. He loves it as long as it benefits him. Once a Republican commits enough vote fraud to win an election, the Democrats will come back to caring about voter integrity. Until then, right now, they think it's great. Let's see. If Wisconsin is the least liberal of the three Rust Belt states, why do polls show it almost as favorable for Kamala as Michigan? Do you think we could see a worse repeat of January 6th? Those are two totally different questions. I have no opinion about Wisconsin other than saying there had been some analysis years ago. I don't know how accurate it is anymore, but Wisconsin and Washington State were viewed as culturally very similar in some of their voting patterns. And so it was always one of these interesting analyses of what changes in Wisconsin, and messaging oftentimes resonates in Washington State. At least that was true 10 to 15 years ago. I don't know if it is so much anymore. I don't think that you're going to see exactly what happened on January 6th ever again, but we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of other issues out there that matter a little bit more, I think, than that. What are your thoughts, Jason, again, on the governor's campaign? In your opinion, what more should he do? I've not seen much of him or on TV. Well, getting the word out is the hardest thing in a governor's race. Obviously, if you're Ferguson, or the candidate running for governor, AG, Bob Ferguson, he's a Democrat, and so he owns the media, or the media is owned by his donors anyway. And so the media is always going to be biased and corrupt and dishonest, and so they're going to basically conceal anything bad that Ferguson does. And so they're generally going to be against Reichert or any Republican for that matter. And so you have to overcome that with a really good ground game and communication scheme, plan that you get out the word to as many people as you can. Reichert doesn't have very many good consultants on his staff. I'm not sure he has any good ones. But then again, I'm not sure there are any good consultants. So I don't even know what that means to be a good consultant in the state anymore, because we've really not seen much in the way of effective campaigning by Republican consultants almost ever. However, if there's a heavy voter contact campaign that's organized and the money's not grifted away to the consultants' back pockets, then you have the ability to influence and change, I think, a lot of people's minds if they can find out that there's an option on the ballot. Otherwise, that swing voter that probably isn't that swing, they would lean more left just by default. Reflexively, they're going to vote Democrat, but they know everything sucks and there's a problem and they don't like the crime, they don't like the car being stolen or the house being broken into or the homeless junkie camps hanging out around the street corners. Some of them may decide to, even if they don't admit it to their friends at the Wine and Cheese Club, they may decide they want to vote for Republican. Those are the people you need to reach. And if that campaign is doing a good job reaching out to them in some way, then we'll see. But anyway, who knows? Thunderstriker, your many questions coming up. Vance won the debate, but the bar for Walz was set so low it became his secret weapon. He outperformed expectations, and some may have come back to him, but it definitely wasn't enough. Again, I just don't know how the VP debate is going to influence the election at all. Trying to get ahead to actual questions here. Jason, do you think the Supreme Court will take the Illinois or Maryland gun ban? California can buy stripped lower receivers, but we can't. Did they purposely expand the law, or FFL is afraid of Ferguson? I think that it's interesting. The Washington State challenge. As I was listening to the radio, Dan Mitchell, who I think was lead plaintiff on that case with going after 1639, which is essentially Bob Ferguson's Bloomberg kind of billionaire effort of taking away firearms from you and I, especially semi-automatic firearms, especially the most effective firearms out there. Same type of firearm I had when I was involved in that shooting with that bad guy on my property or my dad's property next door. Those are the kind of things they're trying to take away from us with that law. And the Supreme Court has ruled multiple times that that's just completely wrong. But these local judges are doing this. The local federal judges are doing it anyway. They're ignoring the Supreme Court because they're gun grabbers, right? They don't believe in your Second Amendment rights or the state or the federal Constitution at all. They accept a much more intrusive and abusive federal government. And so they're purposely doing rulings, even knowing they're going to get overturned. They're still doing it anyway because they figure if they can make the path hard enough, it makes it more difficult, even though we're continuously going up to get the same decisions. I hope they continue to do that, and then they win the Illinois or the Maryland one. I still think the Washington State one's a good one to get up there, but we'll see. Serious question, where is a young boy supposed to place a tampon? Yeah, Jack. Well, that would have been a good question for Governor Walz, except that I'm sure that was something he was prepped for. I mean, don't think they don't read what the more conservative groups are putting out there as funny memes or something. So they come back with their answers, and so probably I would guess if you were Vance, you probably stayed away from that because it was just a silly and dumb thing. Walz is a weirdo in a lot of ways, and that was his policy platform that he prioritized while he was governor. The bigger problem under the Walz governorship was really the way he just let their cities burn there. That it was just a lot of problems. Vivek would make a great press secretary. Actually, I kind of agree with you on that. He actually probably would. Let's see. What assurances do we have that we'll have better safeguards in place for an honest and secure election? None really, other than the fact that across the country there has been general and gradual focus with, honestly, a bunch of unsung heroes that nobody in this audience or anywhere in the traditional public sphere is ever going to know, who went out and did a lot of work documenting and looking at things a lot closer. When auditors at the local level find out that they've been caught being sloppy, slipshod, or half marginal with their job, they'll never admit it, but what they'll do oftentimes, you'll start to see them go back and clean things up a little bit better. Now, how much does that change things? I don't know, but on the margins, it does change it somewhat. The point is you want voting to be easy, but cheating to be hard. That should be the process and the approach you take, and we will just see. Let's see. Dan Bongino, yeah, sorry about that. Dan Bongino, how do I not remember that name? Anyway, I think Dan Bongino would be a really tough guy to debate, actually, because I think he's really sharp, quick, pretty knowledgeable, and I think he gets back. He'd be a tough guy to debate. He'd be a fun person to debate, actually. I would love to debate Dan Bongino. The problem is I probably wouldn't disagree with him on much, and so it's hard. I mean, I know people who've been on Debate Club, right? They're supposed to be able to take either side, but I never was on Debate Club, and so I'm going to debate something that I believe in and try to debate it, and then see if I can have somebody change my mind on it. But we'll just see how it goes. Daniela Sella, did you see the governor's debate? There were actually two debates. I spoke about the last one last week. The second one, the one that was in Spokane, and there was another one before then. And I did have some video discussion about it. Thunderstriker again, many questions today. Do you think it's a good idea to create a law that prevents the government from taxing individuals and companies over a certain percentage? Sure, but I think it's bigger than that. Flat tax or fair tax, either one would work. No matter what, we've picked the worst choice of all for taxation structure. It's the most corrupt in a lot of ways because when you have a super complicated tax code, all you're doing is you're enriching specialists and billionaires at the expense of the rest of us. If it's flat, if it's simple, if it's easy to understand, if it's impossible to game or very difficult to game, people just tend, and it can be a lot smaller and it can be simple and predictable. Which I think is what got to this one, which was a second question down here. Let's see, and another one here. Also, are you in favor of federal budget based on the previous year's tax and tariff revenue? Sure. Zero-based budgeting is always better. I don't like the idea of just budget growth. This is one of the games, and they do this at the local government level too. They'll say, okay, our budget, we're going to increase it X amount next year. And then if they only increase it by half the amount that they're thinking they're going to increase it, they call that a cut. It's not a cut. That's just growing at a slightly slower rate. Zero-based budgeting is a much better way to do it. You need to re-justify what you're spending your money on every time you have a budget that comes out. And I think that should be true not just at the federal level, but all the way down to the school board. Anyway, yeah, he was a friend with school shooters. Yes, he was. He would have to be laughing about that. But anyway, we'll see. Joanne T, do you have any advice for Joe Kent versus Maria Perez debate tomorrow night? That's interesting. I mean, I live in the 3rd Congressional District, and I didn't know they were having a debate. That is interesting. My guess is Joe Kent does pretty well in that debate. In a way, it's really his to lose because Marie Perez is even though she is the sitting congresswoman, that's considered a really tough congressional race for her to win. It's a district that voted Trump. And so, and this is Joe Kent's second go-round. I mean, the advice there is, just know what you're talking about. I've talked to Joe about a lot of things. He's actually much better speaker about most of the topics now. 2 years out, he ran them 2 years ago. But, I think he'd be difficult to debate on some of these subjects. I think he'd be pretty knowledgeable. And Marie Perez has been in there long enough, Glusenkamp Perez, I mean, she's been in there long enough now that she would be probably more capable now than she would have been a couple years ago. So it'd just be really interesting to see how that debate goes. That I'm pretty interested in, actually. Thank you for pointing that out, by the way. Joanne, that's excellent. I would just say be yourself, talk about the subjects that people care about, and, there's no reason to have a bitter back and forth. I think the demeanor between Waltz and J.D. Vance tonight is more typical of most political debates that you'll see, especially at the local level. Let's see. I think that Trump is ending up losing Michigan but wins Wisconsin and Pennsylvania seems to be the general consensus. I don't know. I mean, I don't even waste a minute of time worrying about that kind of stuff generally. I just can't trust the polls. I do think the only thing that makes me think about Pennsylvania a little bit more now, because I talked to some activists out there who thought Trump didn't have a chance in Pennsylvania, but I've been looking at other activists who are less old school Republican, and they've been doing a lot of groundwork, registering voters and doing some work, and it seems like it's the less glamorous work in politics that tends to produce the best results. And so they seem to be indicating that Trump's likely to prevail. It'll still be a swing state, but they think that he'll prevail. That's a big deal from an electoral college standpoint for a presidential race right now. So we'll see. Are you Team Vance or Team Waltz? Team Vance, I mean, it's not even a doubt. Team Vance for sure. I mean, hopefully that's obvious. But Jason, what do you make of Waltz's obsession with China? Well, okay, so here's, and this is actually something, I'm more familiar with this than I probably normally would be about some of these subjects, but Waltz has a weird obsession with China. Now, I say this as somebody who's visited China quite a bit myself. Not recently, but as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, tonight's live stream, I went to China before Tiananmen Square, just on a running team in high school. live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's not a surprise. China was just opening up, seemed like a great thing to do, and I loved going over there running. And I was fascinated with Asia after that. When I got out of college, I went to work for a manufacturing company in Bellingham and spent some time traveling to Asia as part of, it wasn't just China, it was Taiwan too, and not so much Japan then, but later on I traveled more to Hong Kong, Japan, China, and Taiwan in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. I think the last time I was over there was 2007 or 6. I don't remember now, but I went a lot, more than I can actually remember all the times I went. But so I spent some time over there, and you run into different types of people, and listen, I love the Chinese people in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of cultural clashes between China and America, just sometimes in how we see the world. And the clash in particular really comes into what I saw happening later on in China when the government started just cracking down and controlling everything, right? And they were really starting to get really aware of foreigners who were visiting there, and they do a lot of grooming of businessmen and visitors to China. And China is a beautiful place. There's a lot of neat things and great history to visit and see. Huge cities, I mean, massive cities. I lived in New York City for 4 years, and I know the difference. These are massive cities, Shenzhen and Guangzhou, Ningbo, just a lot of these different places you go there. And I actually really enjoyed Hong Kong. I spent more time in Hong Kong. Early days of Hong Kong especially were more interesting. But anyway, one of the things that happens, I think, is when you become a ambassador, right, from China to America, it's very easy for you to be influenced in a way that's not good. And I think the Chinese are very, very good at dedicating resources to recruiting people like that. And I think sometimes people just get excited when they travel. I used to backpack in other parts of the world too, and you'll see people come around and they're glitter-eyed about whatever it is that they're visiting. And this place is always awesome and amazing. And the longer they spend there, sometimes that the scales fall off their eyes. It's not so exciting anymore. But a lot of times, and he just strikes me as one of these guys that was that way going to China. I love going to China. I wouldn't go there today, but I loved, because especially now, I have no idea. I'd probably get disappear into China, but I used to go there, and it's a neat place to go. It's a neat place to visit. A lot of neat people there, but I can see how the government would try to influence and take over somebody like that, especially if you're in the military, which he was. They're going to pick you and try to influence you, and it looks like he became influenced by them. So it's kind of weird. Let's see. Lysander Spooner, watching the debate from an anarchist perspective left me disgusted by both Waltz and Vance. So many empty promises, the lack of economic literacy, and their need to control people was very telling. Well, there is a difference, and I'm sorry you couldn't see that, but you're right. I mean, there was a bit of an effort, though, between both of them were trying to kind of push back and forth. That's kind of interesting. With the recent outcry from people in Illinois and New York about illegal migration, I think Trump can narrow the gap there. Well, he might not win. Do you think either state can be competitive in 2028? I don't, but I do believe that New York has, in particular New York, Trump has an unusual, connection because he obviously grew up there. And and then the illegal immigration chaos and some of the other things. Remember, New York City voted for Giuliani. I know that was a while ago, but they did several times in a row. And that's a city that's 80% Democrat, 85%, somewhere in that range. It's not like the Republicans had a really awesome ground game, So people can change. I don't know how much they will now, but we'll see. Let's see. Guys, a lot of comments, just trying to get questions. Here's a good question. Frank, this is a good question. Frank, good question. Thank you for asking it. Any thoughts on how the dock strike might affect Washington? And I do. Now, keep in mind, the dock workers in Washington State, so Tacoma, Olympia, Seattle, right? None of the ports in Washington State are affected because the longshoremen out here long ago negotiated contracts, and they do get paid a lot more out here than they do on the East Coast. What I expect to affect in Washington State is a greater increase in port traffic, because if this lasts longer than a week, a lot of these companies are going to decide, okay, screw it, we're going to start, sending us stuff we want for Christmas, especially like Christmas stuff that they would want. They're going to start sending it in to Washington. Now, the Panama Canal tends to be, because I notice there's a lot of stuff that comes out of like Brazil or that part of South America that tends to come straight across to the ports on the East Coast, a little bit closer, and to the ports in the Gulf. And since they're all on strike at the same time, it would seem to me that they would use the Panama Canal as a shortcut to get over to the west side and then come up. Now, it's expensive. You have to pay the fees going through the Panama Canal, and anybody that's been familiar with this lately knows that there's a backlog. Oftentimes, you're having to wait to go through the canal. There's been some challenges down in the Panama Canal as well with some construction that they have going on. But I would anticipate that one way or another that you're going to have just a lot more traffic shifting to West Coast ports. And I feel like it will escalate up, and you'll suddenly get a lot more traffic here. And I do think that that's going to be a genuine impact in Washington State. Let's see. Do the Dems spend more time taking notes during the debate while Republicans spend time listening? Great question, because I observed that as well. Walz was like writing tons of stuff down, and you didn't see J.D. Vance do any of that. And I'm not totally sure that the writing it down was that beneficial to Walz, unless he was just had some, unless you had something that you had memorized, you're saying, okay, I'll say this. I know sometimes when I go up and speak in public, I'll have a story I want to make sure I tell, or just some fact I want to remember to say during my presentation. So if you ever watch me, you'll see me usually with like a notepad, a small one like this, because nobody's, at least I don't think, it's not effective public speaking skill to do this, right? I don't think it is too much. So I'll take a couple notes, maybe 3 to 5 points, maybe a little bit more complex if I've got a longer presentation to make, but just take some notes. And I don't need to give like a full statement. I just need to make a little note so it triggers my memory, and I'll remember, that's right, I don't want to forget that story, or I don't want to forget making that statement. But Walz had a lot of stuff, and in a debate, I don't know. I mean, I think it's worth, if you hear somebody say something, you'll say, okay, I want to write this down because I want to make sure in my response I address this issue. I'm assuming that's what he was trying to do, but usually I don't find people taking a lot of notes in debate at all, unless it's a nervous tick where you're just trying to show that you're doing something rather than that you're pissed off or something like that. Let's see. Sorry, guys, there's so many more questions here that I just couldn't get to. I'm going to try to skip ahead to anything interesting. Yeah, Charles Hedrick, I saw this. His wedding anniversary is the same as the Tiananmen Square massacre, which is weird. And just because he wanted to pick a date that he'd remember, or is he celebrating? I don't know. It's just strange. Let's see. Hi, I'm Venezuelan. Daniela Sella. I'm Venezuelan and a U.S. citizen. Why is everyone against us? I've been living here for 28 years. Well, I'm assuming if you're living here and you're a U.S. citizen, you're not Venezuelan anymore. You're American. So I don't think anybody's against you. I have met and have several friends, especially in the political world, that escaped from Venezuela, probably like you did. And I find them to be tremendous champions of freedom and liberty, and I'm very happy they've come to America. I'm sad they had to leave Venezuela, but I'm happy that they're American today. So I don't think that's what your sense. What you should be aware of course, is obviously the Venezuelan crime gangs that have come across, which you don't support, and neither do we. And so there's probably a lot of people upset about that. And, anyway, the same thing happened with the Cuban immigrants and the Mariel boat lift, where they emptied the prisons in Cuba and dumped them in Florida, right? That became a big problem in America. This was back in the, I don't know when that was, 70s, 80s, something like that. It was a long time ago. Scarface, right? The whole Scarface movie. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. Any thoughts? Charles Hedrick, you're asking me something I'm not aware of right now. The Tina Peters conviction. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I will have to figure out what that is. Let's see. I see a lot of people asking other questions. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to get to one of these last questions here. If there's anything I can get. Dale Mills, I know somebody said, what did Vance lie about? I didn't really catch anything that he lied about, so if somebody really thinks there's something that he did lie about, that's great. let's see, class. It's great to just tell me. I'm interested in that. Missy off topic, class of 98, Sammamish here. Where are you from in Washington? Well, I grew up in what is now the city of Newcastle. It's on my website. You can see it there, no secrets. But and then my parents got divorced, and I ended up living in West Hill, Kent, which was actually right on the border of Federal Way. And so I went to Thomas Jefferson High School. That's where I graduated. Class of 89, so a few years before you. And that's where I was. Let's see. Nathan Daniel, this is a good point. West Coast Longshore contract was a year ago, and the strike lasted for 2 weeks. Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't. It's funny. I didn't remember it lasting that long, but this is going to be the real. If the strike lasts longer than a week or two, it's a big impact. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. Okay. There's great. I am not going to answer that question, but again, you can ask me anything. Doesn't mean I can answer it. Let's see. Also consider that most ports are partially or wholly run by the CCP. Do you support American workers losing jobs to CCP robots? I don't, but I'm going to explain something about automation to you, and this is an argument that I will have and a disagreement that I'm going to have with some of the longshoremen. I think longshoremen should be paid well, and I think that the East Coast longshoremen deserve a pay raise. I do, right now, absolutely, no doubt about it. So unambiguous, I would give them a pay raise. That's not the drama there. The interesting thing to me is more the resistance to common sense automation that does exist, and it's going to have to exist here. That doesn't mean that it needs to be run by the Chinese. And this is a problem and a disagreement that I'm going to have with a lot of big business guys. I think it's a horrible mistake to let your ports ever be controlled by any foreign government at all. And so we run into significant problems when that happens. But one of the things we also have is an antiquated, it's an antique port system when you don't allow basic and fundamental, inevitable automation for certain tasks. There's also the touching question of the containers, where you should be able to break your loads down in a more efficient way, especially using inland waterways. I think there's some argument to be made for that. It's less of an impact on the West Coast than it is in some of these other places on the East Coast, I think, where they have a little bit better canal system or rivers they can use, but there still is an impact. So anyway, I just think that that there's going to have to be some compromise. There's going to need to be more automation. I think you don't want your ports controlled by a foreign country, and I think the longshoremen do deserve a better pay than they're making now. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to probably call it a night. It's been, hour and a half after. That's a little bit longer than I wanted to go. Guys, thank you so much. You asked a lot of good questions. Hopefully I did a decent job answering some of them. And if you have other questions about Washington State or elections or anything else, just remember to kind of get them ready for next Monday, because I anticipate that next Monday is when I'm going to have a live stream closer to a regular time and not so late as it is tonight. And hopefully it will be a little bit more, less focus on a national debate and more focus again on some of the Washington State stuff. I just did a video today about Thurston County, and even though it's about Thurston County, and most of you probably don't live here or live in the same county I do, I'm going to tell you that the video is interesting just because it reveals a clown, an elected clown, and a circus and bad things going on in local government. And if it's happening in Thurston County, it's probably something like it. Could be happening where you live too. So I'm hoping that by illustrating what's going on there, it gives you a little bit of more ideas as to where you can look for things where you live. It was a longer video than I expected, but I thought it was well done. So you'll have to tell me if you think it is too. Probably launching that one tomorrow. Hope all's well, guys. Thank you so much for logging in. It's a late night. I got a long drive tonight to go back home, but I hope that that this was good for you. And remember, as I always say with all my videos, the future belongs to those who show up. Please don't forget to show up. make sure you're engaged and involved, and do what a couple of people here have been talking about doing, influence others around you to change how they're going to vote if you can, and get them to vote for people who care about liberty and freedom and not just big government grant grifting operations. Hope all is well, and thank you guys so much for logging in and all the questions that you sent. Thunderstriker, I know you dominated the questions today, which you've done as well in the past, but some of those were really great questions, and I hope I did a decent job answering them, but a lot of people, other people had some pretty good questions as well. So hope all's well, stay safe out there, be prepared, and we'll see you next time.